Wednesday. Likely to start fairly cloudy in the south, but that cloud breaking up. And then actually for many, it's a fine summer's day tomorrow. There will be a few more showers, perhaps just drifting into southwest Scotland, but otherwise most places dry. Temperatures pleasant low 20s for the majority, but still up to the high 20s, possibly across the southeast, 27 or 28 Celsius. A few more of those showers drifting into northern Scotland, staying fairly breezy here as well. We may just see a few showers for Northern Ireland and spreading into northwest England during the night. And Thursday will be a cloudier day across northern Britain. Still a few showers coming into western Scotland, Northern Ireland, maybe the odd one for northern England. But for much of England and Wales, Thursday's another dry day, and certainly in the south, plenty more sunshine. Temperatures up to warm category, I think you described them as, but just not as hot as recent days. However, as we go towards the weekend, and particularly into Sunday and Monday, temperatures could rise and rise beyond what we saw earlier this week. Extreme heat is possible. The Met Office have an amber extreme heat warning in place for Sunday and Monday.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to Headliners. I'm Simon Evans. Very shortly, Dana, the other Simon, and myself will be taking you through tomorrow morning's newspapers. But firstly, here's Polly with the news headlines.
Simon, thank you. The top story today on GB News, 8 Conservative MPs have now secured enough nominations to enter the race to replace Boris Johnson as party leader and ultimately Prime Minister. They are Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, Tom Tugendhat, Liz Truss, Nadhim Zahawi, Kemi Badenoch, Jeremy Hunt and Suella Braverman. They're all going into the first ballot, which will take place tomorrow. The former Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, withdrew just minutes before the deadline, and backbencher Rehman Chishti also stepped aside after failing to secure a single public supporter. Sir Graham Brady of the 1922 committee said the next stage of the contest will take place tomorrow.
Those 8 will go to the first round ballot tomorrow between 1:30 and 3:30 with the result announced as soon as we can after that.
And the government says it will allow a debate on Labour's proposed no confidence vote if the motion is amended to remove any reference to the Prime Minister. That comes after Labour's initial motion for a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister was denied. The Labour parties accused the government of running scared and called on the Tory leadership candidates to denounce the decision. But a government spokesperson said a vote on the Prime Minister right now would be a waste of parliamentary time, as he has already resigned. Our other top story on GB News today, an inquiry has concluded that more than 1,000 children were sexually exploited over at least a 30-year period in Telford in Shropshire. The report calls the police and council failings shocking and says it shows the suffering of generations of children and the failures of those who should have protected them. Telford and Wrekin Council issued a statement saying it apologised wholeheartedly to the victims and is working day in and day out to provide the best possible support for victims of this crime. West Mercia Police apologised to the survivors and admitted their actions fell far short of the protection you should have had. Well, in other news today, Twitter is suing Elon Musk for breaking a £37 billion deal to buy the social media platform. Twitter is asking a US court to order the Tesla owner to complete the merger at the agreed share price. Last week, Musk said he was terminating the deal because Twitter failed to provide information regarding fake accounts on the platform. And here, Her Majesty the Queen has said the COVID-19 vaccine rollout had been amazing, and she recognised the achievements of UK medical staff by awarding the George Cross Medal to the NHS. In a ceremony at Windsor Castle, the monarch and Prince Charles welcomed NHS bosses and a frontline worker from each of the UK's 4 nations. The award recognises acts of great heroism and courage in the face of extreme danger. And finally, NASA has unveiled the first pictures taken by its new telescope, the James Webb Telescope. The $9 billion machine's expected to revolutionise astronomy by allowing scientists to peer farther into the universe than ever before, while at the same time providing much greater detail and clarity. NASA says its high-resolution pictures will allow scientists to observe the evolution of galaxies and the life cycles of stars. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, where now it's time for Headliners.
Hello and welcome to Headliners with me, Simon Evans. Joining me tonight, 2 top comedians, Dana Alexander, Simon Fanshawe. How the devil are you both?
I'm well. And yourself?
I've come casual. I'm celebrating the heat wave.
You do look very casual.
I know. Normally I'm suited, ties, all that. Oh, you think 50s bowling alley? Oh, that's nice.
AirTech shoes, maybe?
I think you'll find. They're deck shoes, but I'm not showing them because legs are good as they may be.
Do you enjoy the heat, Dana? It's
not for me. Not in a place with no AC. I basically just try to find businesses that have AC.
But
by the way, you have to explain. You know what AC is, but it's air conditioning for anybody watching.
Okay, yes.
We don't know what it is.
Previous generation. Air conditioning, which is more expensive to run than heating in the winter, isn't it? So
I think so.
We don't have it at the moment.
But you're quite right to point that out.
Yeah, that would be another bill to cope with. Anyway, let's take a look at tomorrow's front pages. We start with The Telegraph. I will run the economy like Thatcher if I win, says Sunak. There he is at his press conference. The police 2 PC to stop Asian sex abuse ring is also on there, and Putin using prisoners and poor to bolster army. The Guardian have a leadership battle, leaves 8 Tory rivals scrapping for votes. We will, of course, be discussing all of those very shortly. And a star of the show, Telescope's stunning new view of space. The Financial Times has 8 make Tory ballot as allies of Johnson step up, stop Rishi push. A lot of shushes there, and Heathrow puts cap on flight ticket sales in effort to avoid further summer chaos. The Daily Mirror has our recycling is dumped abroad. I think we kind of knew that, but anyway, there's obviously some new information. And Bex, I feared what Stalker would do next. The Daily Express have Boris loyalists backing Truss to Stop Rishi. There she is in classically Thatcherite attire, and also the BBC top earners story. We will also be covering that. Of course we will. The Metro has Britain on red alert. Emergency services struggling to cope ahead of hottest day ever. I doubt it's going to be the hottest day ever. And finally, the Daily Star. So, Gary, what first attracted you to the multi-millionaire BBC? Those are your front pages. Let's see off what's inside. So, little confusion as to what is the main story of the day, Simon. It is the top 8 now. We have the racked up front leaders for the leadership race.
Well, I think there are two things about this that are kind of interesting. One is, it always interests me how much people on the same side hate each other more than people that they're opposed to. So this whole thing about Truss warning that the Tory right, she says, must unite or, quote, hand Mr Sunak the keys to number 10. You'd think, well, yeah, but having a Tory in number 10 would be kind of a thing that you'd think a Tory would want, wouldn't you?
Yes.
So the viciousness of it is extraordinary. And also, it does annoy me the way she's doing Thatcher impressions, you know. And if you're going to do Thatcher impressions, do you remember Steve Nallen, the great Thatcher impression? Get him in to do it. Do you know what I mean? Don't pretend. But the other thing that does interest me about this is that if you look at the 8, there are 4 men and 4 women. There are 4 white people and 4 not white people. And I suppose what's interesting about this is that the Tories have produced a list of more diversity than Labour's ever produced. And my question is, why? I kind of have a little theory, which is that...
Gatekeeping, racial gatekeeping.
I think to some extent there's... Well, the way I was going to express it was to say that the thing about the right is that the right doesn't like us as a group, but they like individuals, whereas the left likes people as a group. They don't really like individuals. So you find the Tories, you know, when we were sort of campaigning for gay equality, they didn't really like us as a group, but they love us on the dance floor. Do you know what I mean? And I think there's something here that it is a sort of gatekeeping thing. I think there was another thing.
What do you mean by gatekeeping? You mean the Tories are gatekeeping?
Yeah, so if you get somebody... So if you look at the way that black people typically vote, they typically will vote with Labour, Democrats. And so what they'll do is they'll find the Tory one, right? So they use the exception to prove the rule and make that person who is actually not quite representative of the whole, as they are minority voters within their minority, but they still tick that box.
But the thing about this representative of, I mean, I spent all my life, trying to get people to talk about diversity as real diversity. And so one of the things I'm always saying to people is that these groups of people, BAME as the expression is, black and minority ethnic. I mean, that doesn't really describe anything
I think they've retired that. They have retired that.
They have, but one of the reasons is that if you're going to use it as an analysis of a group experience, pretty much racism's all you're going to discover if you just group them together.
I have a joke about that. It's basically saying there's white people and everybody else.
Yes, exactly. There's a great line in Hay Fever, Noel Coward's play, where she can't remember anybody's name and she comes into the room and she goes, John? That's everybody. Everybody, that's John. But it's the same with us gays. LGBTQIA+++. Yeah, again, it's lumping together everybody who, there's kind of 2 guys, straight guys in Surrey who don't fit the group. But I do think that if the candidates in the Tory list were Asian, that would, in a sense, because I think there are probably more Asian people, particularly if you look at the people who came over in the 70s from East Africa. They were already entrepreneurs and shopkeepers, and so a lot more voted Tory. But typically, the black population don't, but it's much more divided. I'm just intrigued by why the Tories have produced more diversity than Labour.
Yes, well, that certainly is the case. Do you think that that's the primary sort of source of division between the candidates?
Oh, no, I mean, clearly...
They won't be seeing themselves in those...
No, I don't think they will be. But I do think that they're claiming, with some justification, that they have had a more diverse cabinet. Yeah. I mean, the clear battle here is it seems to me, is that they think they're going to lose the next election. I mean, the chances are that they will do. So, therefore, this is actually not a battle to be Prime Minister for very long. This is a battle for control of the party.
But will it be? Because if you lose the next general election as leader of the party, there's a good chance you'll be expected to resign. It can be a bit of a hospital pass in that respect.
Yeah, I guess it can. You would be expected to resign, but I think there's even something deeper going on here that we haven't quite hit on, is when I think sometimes people support a weak candidate so that they can, when they eventually dwindle that vote down, the stronger candidate is a surefire winner while
Well, also, that's interesting. And, of course, the other thing, too, of course, is this two-stage process. So you're playing to lots of audiences. And what is outrageous, really, is that, you know, our next Prime Minister is really going to be elected by 100,000 people, you know, mostly in the south.
Yeah, it keeps happening. Wednesday's Guardian now, and a no to a vote of no confidence, Dane, although it seems to be a nuanced refusal.
Yeah, so government refuses Labour time to do its non-confidence motion. Now, this is a little bit interesting because apparently the government has clapped out and is running scared and refusing allow time to let the Labour vote of a confidence motion happen. What they're trying to say is because the vote of non-confidence was not just for the Conservative Party, but because it was for Boris, and Boris is already out, that there's a redundancy in that. But I think that they found that this was something that they did in 1965 with one of your leaders. So there really wasn't a precedent to say that. But at the end of the day, we know as soon as it doesn't go the Tory way, they'll change the rules.
Do they really need to? Because they're obviously not going to win a vote of no confidence because, you know, the Tories have a majority. They're not going to vote themselves out. So it does kind of sound like it's time-wasting, but they would say they would allow them that vote. They would make room for it if they were to direct it towards the Tory party rather than direct it towards Boris, who has already resigned.
I think it was more about the Boris's scrupulousness and how long it was and how much support he had for so long. So it brings the support of Boris and that party into question at the same time when you consider all the scandals that have come up, right?
Well, I guess, I mean, my question is whether it's a good tactic or not. And I guess if you're going to argue it's a good tactic, then what you say is that you force Tory MPs to demonstrate that they still support Boris Johnson. So when they go to the polls, that will be what you put on your leaflet. You will say, this MP still supported Boris even after he was disgraced. If you think it's a bad tactic, what you say, well, I think the argument would be that this is the one thing that might unify the Tory party, is that they'll defend the government.
It's kind of reminiscent in that respect of the 6th of January hearings, isn't it, in the United States, where they are the Democratic establishment essentially really want to keep the memory of the insurrection or whatever you want to call it, the outrages at the Capitol. They love to keep that alive because it forces every Republican to say, you supported this.
And you've lost control of your party.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's true. Well, I think there's a good tactic and a bad tactic argument there again. I mean, the Democrats would argue that what they're doing is that they've managed to subpoena enough Republicans that they're now getting actually evidence from both sides and proving a big case. The argument against it is to say that what they do is this gives the only way that Trump can get out of this is standing again in 24. So is it a bad tactic because you're pushing him to stand again? But the polls are indicating, as we might see later.
Divide and conquer, why not?
We'll be on to that story very shortly. I shouldn't have brought it up. Tomorrow's Independent.
You're ahead of yourself, love. You're ahead of yourself.
I synthesise every story and just... Anyway, tomorrow's Independent and the Telford Grooming report, which makes one want to vomit as well, to be honest.
Well, it's worth just so more than... this is another report about systematic child sexual abuse, CSE as it's exploitation, as it's acronymized. So look, this is about grooming gangs. This is in Telford, and it happens, and you remember Rotherham and so on before. I think the really interesting thing about this is that I was looking back, and I've done this before because I once gave a lecture about this stuff. There are two types of sexual offences that are against kids. There are gang grooming in this way, which tends to be vulnerable teenage young people and children, and they tend to be passed around, and those groups of people tend to exist within a network. So typically you'll find in the Rotherham case, it was all about the nighttime economy. It was taxi drivers, late-night takeaways, all that kind of stuff. There's another sect, which is known as type 2 sexual abuse, which is paedophilia, where you've got abusers who are focused on children explicitly, not the exploitation of vulnerable kids. This is type 1, and what you tend to find is that type 1... what happens in type 1 is that there are groups of socially connected men, and they have, in these three cases, been men of age and origin. If you look at type 2, the overwhelming a range of numbers of paedophiles are white men. They tend to operate in clandestine groups out of the public view.
But we are looking at this particular story.
Absolutely.
Which they are groups, and I'm not even comfortable, to be honest, with this term Asian, which would include Chinese or Indonesian.
All right,
very specific locality that they come from.
They are, and this is, you're absolutely right. It is interesting, though, because I then looked back to see, well, what's the research on the prevalence of these kind of, what phrase should we use if we're not going to use Asian?
They were mostly
Pakistani origin.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that Nasir Afzal, who was the guy who prosecuted the case in Rotherham, he was the head of the CPS in the Northwest, you remember, there was a report they did in 2020 which Priti Patel commissioned. Oh, no, she didn't commission it, actually. It came out when she then became Home Secretary. And he said, he said that the report confirms that white men remain the most common offenders, but in high-profile cases, South Asian and British Pakistani men are.
So basically, you're making a plea that we don't learn anything from.
I think what this report,
because this report has made it quite clear that there was a fear of appearing racist, which was driving the failure to take action.
That is,
you do sound somewhat to me.
I'm absolutely not doing that. I appreciate that I might sound. I'm absolutely not doing that. These things must be investigated without fear and without any kind of side.
And I don't buy the fear story. Because when you look at how, listen, the police have no problem with us. They have no problem seeming whether or not they seem racist by obviously disproportional stop and searches and things like that. So that story just doesn't add up for you. What else doesn't add up is that this has been going on till back in the 70s. How do you have that much reporting, right? So what's either happening is that one of the things that I thought was very interesting was there was a girl who actually was impregnated by a guy that was, obviously over 18 when she was 14. How is it that he didn't get prosecuted?
And here's the thing. Contemporaneous media reports called this young girl his girlfriend and talked of a stormy relationship. Here's the thing, and I think what you're saying is really interesting, because here's the real thing, is that those gangs may be socially connected, they may be of a certain kind. The real thing is these are poor kids, and what the police are doing is refusing to believe the experience of those kids, and they are privileging the experience of adults over the kids. And I think that poverty and vulnerability, to me, is what underlies it. But I do think there is documented evidence that actually the police, or particularly counsellors, actually, who were responsible for the social services departments, pulled back from for fear of being seen as racist.
And they scaled down specialist CSE teams to virtually zero to save money
sort of
as
thing.
well.
I mean, it's hideous. I
just want to know how it's possible. It just does not seem like something that could go on at that scale for that length of time. I think there's a lot more to the story, and that there needs to be some investigating from an outside department, and I don't just mean, the CSE.
But you have seen the report, and you don't buy what they have discovered anyway.
No, I do. Well, of course I buy what they discovered. What I don't buy is there's more to the story. I think there's a bit of a cover-up here because, I'm sorry, when you're operating at that level, if you look at the mafia, for example, they don't get to run things the way they do if they don't have an in. I won't say too much more, but I think there's a lot more to the story.
There may be...
Wednesday's Telegraph now, one of the Tory favourites, Dana.
Yes, Kemi Badenoch. Rishi Sunak's cost of living handouts are a waste of taxpayer money. So the former Equalities Minister says that the micro policies don't actually solve any of the underlying problems as she officially launches the Tory leadership build. So she thinks that she'll be a fresh face. And I mean, I couldn't even imagine her fresh face when she was newborn. I suspect she's like born with glasses on. She looks so serious. Do you know what I mean? But, she does have a point. I think we were talking about this earlier when it came to, no, we weren't, but with Boris, just handing out all these little treats, the £50 here, they don't make a difference at the end of the day. Go out for dinner in central London and see how far £50 goes when it's a one-time off. She is right about that. I do think that there has to be real policy change.
Well, I think it's both, isn't it? I agree with you. I don't think it makes any difference. But the trouble with posh people is that they don't think £50 can make difference. And actually, it can make a difference to somebody who can't feed their kids.
That's true.
Because they say, my darling, I mean, £50, it wouldn't buy a...
That's very true.
It wouldn't buy a pashmina for the cockapoo.
But £50 is fine. But the point is it £50 per week increase in your pension? Is it £50 off your petrol bill? Or is it a £50 voucher to go and spend at the florist. That's when...
And the truth of it is that systemic poverty is not relieved by a 50 quid handout. It's absolutely right.
Yeah. But sometimes it'll buy a vote, though. Right.
So Kimi is positioning herself against Rishi specifically as somebody she thinks he is not honest with the British public about the impact of the pandemic, about the pickle we're in, and she thinks it's better to tell people the unvarnished truth. Do you believe that she's doing that, or do you think she's telling a different...
I do think that she's pretty serious. I don't know that I agree with her on all of her policies, but I think, you know, this government, at the very least, could be accused of cronyism, right? And I think Rishi was a lot closer to that, especially when you consider what his wife was invested, right? And when she had, and all of, you know, all of his stuff. Yeah. Also, I think his real Achilles heel is that this government won a big lump of working class voters. I've never even met a working class person. Like, we saw him when he was trying to pump the gas there. It's just, he's weak. And I think she knows that the working class probably aren't going to go with him, and not just because he doesn't talk to working class people.
On to Wednesday's Times. Watchdogs unhappy with WhatsApp use in government. Is this right?
This is unbelievable. There's basically... Yes, use of private WhatsApp broke the transparency rules. So what you've got here is you've got ministers conducting government business in private WhatsApp groups. And there are three problems with this. I mean, firstly is confidentiality and the breach of that. Secondly is that if you're in a private group, actually you're evading the public record. So the transparency of the public record. And the third thing is you've got inappropriate access to ministers. A couple of examples. It turns out that official government emails were sent from a private company server that included that of Oliver Bonas, who at the time employed the former health official Gina Coladangelo, who you may remember was caught having an affair with Hancock. Now, I mean, this is exactly... Do you remember when Hillary Clinton was accused of using private emails?
Her emails.
So this is the same thing. But here what you've got is, I mean, even you're talking about contact between ministers and potential PPE and testing suppliers. This is off the grid. I mean, it's simply outrageous.
And they're serious,
yeah, it's really serious. And the what's it commissioner, the information commissioner, he has received 100 pages of correspondence between departmental accounts. I mean, this is a huge amount. This is not like the odd email.
Yeah,
this is a huge amount. So I think it's very, very serious.
And of course, the other thing is, even if he opens it up, it's very easy to delete WhatsApp messages, isn't it?
But there is a record that you can see it's deleted.
Is there? Is there a record?
There is. It will say that this message was deleted message.
Oh, so deleted. Yeah, but you can't restore the message, and the WhatsApp stuff is so.
That's true, but if there'd be a record that it was deleted.
But it evades the key thing is it evades the public record.
And I think
it's probably just say, oh, it's a typo, you know, and I retyped it, and this is what it... You know.
Well,
you know what I mean?
I think they'd have to make some stricter rules. What I think is really sad is that he wants to block the release of the correspondence between himself and his lover, Coladangelo. So this is actually something that could potentially cost the taxpayer. But the thing is, they must have been having both types of conversations. So as much as you want to hide your sexting, you know, she was still working with you. People, I think, should be privy to that information.
I agree. And I agreed when it was Clinton, and I cannot be a hypocrite now and say it doesn't matter this time. So, yeah, that's it for part one. Coming up, we've got Musk versus Trump. Farah not on the run, and perhaps it's bye-bye Biden, at least in a couple of years. We'll see you in 2 minutes.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
And welcome back to Headliners with me, Simon Evans, Dana Alexander and Simon Fanshawe. So, hopefully we've got most of the heavy stuff out of the way now and we can start having a dig at the old BBC. They're still paying people far too much by the look of it. And they dared, but they did not win, Dana, with the SAS story. Is this correct?
Yeah, another heavy story. So basically, the Ministry of Defence says a documentary claiming that the Special Air Service repeatedly killed Afghan detainees puts the troop at risk. So a BBC documentary has claimed SAS operatives repeatedly killed detainees and unarmed citizens in Afghanistan, causing the Ministry of Defence to hit back at what is called unjustified conclusion. A new investigation claims to have uncovered 54 suspicious killings by one squad during a 6-month tour.
Yeah, so they were drawing conclusions just from the statistics, essentially, saying something is going on here, and the SAS or the military themselves said, you cannot do that.
Well, the central claim, I think, is based on this idea that these were detainees that were shot, and the argument goes that the SAS reports were considered suspicious because they said that the detainees were shot after grabbing weapons, and the argument goes that when you detain someone, you also restrain them. So actually, and there's this, I'm afraid it's quite funny, but the Afghans being shot dead because they pulled weapons from behind curtains or furniture. I mean, it's not like a magic act. Do you know what I mean? I mean, but apparently the argument is that they were detained and suddenly they would grab, you know, and then they'd be shot. And that's suspicious because it's a repeated allegation.
I assume they don't have anything of the sort of, like, body cams or whatever, that is exactly why these have been introduced in the police, but I suppose there is...
They're the SAS,
yes,
they're the secret air service, that's the point.
Well, you don't have to have it as live feed, but there could be some sort of...
I always have I mean, I think, you know, the rule of law has got to exist everywhere, and you've got to have restraints on legitimate military action. Having said that, I come from a military family, and actually the idea that when you're put into service and you're sent out, you know, and the idea is you sort of train to kill people, and then you do kill people, and then they say, well, you shouldn't have killed people in that way. And I always think that's problematic. I do think they ought to be investigated. I do think they ought to be accountable in some way, but I still think it's problematic. Can I hold both opinions at once?
What do you think, Dana?
Well, I think there's a little bit where there's smoke, there's fire, and I think there's something else too. My take on this story, what I thought was really interesting, is that I think what it does is it proves a larger point about the real dangers that people are facing in Afghanistan, which would legitimate a lot of the guys that are coming over via the channel, right? Because these guys, this is blowing... What I thought was really interesting, there's so many failures with this whole thing. For example, they didn't evacuate enough people. I think 75,000 to 150 applied for evacuation, and only 18,000 were evacuated, 6,000 of them being British nationals. We know that 142,000 visas were given to Ukrainians fleeing. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy
But just to try and keep it sort of a little bit closer to the actual story in hand, is there a sort of suggestion, do you think, that the BBC and other media channels love to find some dirt that they can bring to bear on the armed forces who are doing an extraordinarily difficult job? That there's this kind of... there's a tension there, and obviously they need to be held accountable, and we like to consider ourselves, you know, that's a part of being in a liberal democracy, but... Is it not just a little bit reckless sometimes when they expose, you know, as they do as, you know, undercover cops and other people who are putting their lives on the line, they expose them to danger because they're being held to such high standards?
I think you have to be held to a higher standard. I know you love to attack the BBC, but I don't think that's really got any
Well, it has on this occasion. I mean, that's what they've been found, isn't it? That's what has been.
Well, no, I mean, there's an argument about it, but just because the government says they don't like this documentary doesn't mean to say it's not right. The government's supposed to defend the SS. I don't know. I haven't seen the documentary.
Yeah, but you don't think there's any argument to say that there is possibly a tendency in the media, not just the BBC, but ITM.
Is this kind of following the same kind of logic of like the way that Julian Assange was, and they're saying, well, this is giving away our military secrets. This is a threat to.
Assange is a different thing again. But what I'm trying to get at is the extent to which people in the armed forces in particular, I'm kind of with what you were just saying, doing an extraordinarily difficult job. They're being kept in line by the media, but when the media overstep that line, then it becomes problematic.
Well, also it got complicated, didn't it, with the case of that solicitors that then claimed that there was a series of war crimes, in quotes, in Iraq, and then it turned out that they were made up and so on and so forth. I mean, I just think it's very complicated territory, really.
It is. This is true. Oh, no, well, this is slightly less complicated territory. We can all have a safe opinion about this one. BBC employees who did actually win in the latest pay rounds.
Well, what happens is that the BBC is now required to publish the pay of the top, I can't remember how many, I think it's 300 of their talent. And inevitably Gary Lineker comes out top, and then there's various other people in it. I think the BBC is in a very difficult position here. It is stuck between the commercial realities of entertainment pay. So they are in a bidding war, and they've lost several of their main presenters recently who've gone to more lucrative contracts elsewhere that they feel where they're also less constrained because of the impartiality of the BBC and so on and so forth. And the other thing that I always feel about the BBC is that this is, I mean, the BBC always seems to defend itself with what it puts on the screen. But actually, if you think of the writers, the actors, the musicians, the proms, the poets, this is the engine of the cultural industries in Britain. It trains huge numbers of people. It injects astonishing amounts of money, which then become massive exports. If you look at the theatre and the way that exports, the film and so on and so forth, the building of Elstree and Pinewood, so much of that is based on what the BBC provides. And so I've always felt that the reason we pay a very modest amount compared with what you pay to Sky or whatever, and good as Sky may or may not be, actually the licence fee pays back the country enormously, it seems to me. So I get slightly fed up with this because, OK, Gary Lineker earns a huge amount of money. Simon, what do you earn? You don't earn 1.35 million, do you, for doing this?
No, but you don't think people should take an interest in it, or you?
I'm fine with people taking an interest in it, but I just get bored with sort of endless pot shots for a political reason at the BBC when actually, and I think the BBC should defend itself as a cultural institution, not just strictly come dancing on the screen. That'd be my point.
Dana?
Well, I think it's a publicly funded company, and again, it doesn't get those advertising dollars, so it's always trying to find money somewhere. The license fee, I think it's worth noting, I think, 25 million people are delinquent on their license fee. You wonder how much it costs to even collect that money. What the BBC has to do is they have to prove value for cost. So if this guy costs this much, or we're going to lose him to another station, they need to justify why paying Gary Lineker specifically is worth that money.
Can I just... There do seem to be two stars who are like well out of the reach of the others, Lineker and Zoe Ball, but the rest of them, I don't think absurd amounts. All the rest of them under $500,000.
Can I just correct something there too? The licence fee is paid by 25 million people.
Yeah.
It's not defaulted by 25 million. It's paid by... And it's gone down. The more people are paying it now, the defaulters have gone down.
OK, the BBC had 24.9 million licence fees in force, meaning the number of people refusing to pay the levy has fallen for a third in a year.
Yes, because it was... I think what that means...
Some 25.2 million licence fees were in force last year. A figure... So... Right? When you look at how many people there are and how many households there are, someone's not paying their licence fee.
Yeah, but the point is 25 million people are paying their licence fee. It's not 25 million people are not paying their licence fee. That was all I wanted to say.
When you look at the stars who dominate this list, Gary Lineker, Zoe Ball, Alan Shearer, Steve Wright, Fiona Bruce, Hugh Edwards, Vanessa Feltz, Scott Mills, Greg James and Ken Bruce, those are all very mainstream stars. They're all very well-known names. They would all expect to command a high salary. It's interesting to me that that's slightly counter to the other narrative about the BBC, which is that it doesn't deserve the licensing anymore because it's becoming hopelessly woke and it has an agenda and it's a sort of very... See what I mean? There's a completely different sort of picture.
I guess I need to know exactly how they generate revenue within Britain, right? So if they're getting it, obviously, through the licensing fees, they can sell their programmes on to other television stations across the world. And what I would say as a Canadian is Nobody in Canada knows one single person.
Yeah, but
on
you
this
don't
list.
have the entertainment industry. The only thing you've done is export all your people to America, which
That's
is brilliant.
true, but I'm
and
just
you
saying,
created the American comedy.
if we're talking about exporting, right, to other countries,
all the money.
they don't.
Who was the biggest export?
Who?
Jeremy Clarkson. And the left went for him and eventually got him. And now the BBC are going bust. Irony. Wednesday's Mail, and Mo Farah is no longer on the run.
Yes, my name is not Mo Farah, it's Hussein. The British Olympic hero reveals that he was trafficked into the UK. So Sir Mo Farah today was assured by the Home Office that he would not be stripped of his British citizenship or the threat of deportation from his Surrey mansion. I mean, they'd have to do a lot more than that. They might have to give the medals back if they wanted to deport him. I think it's at this time right now when we're looking at all the potential deportations to Rwanda, I think it's really important that I think it's a lovely story to have somebody with such a high profile explain that situation and actually humanize that story, because we do talk a lot about migrants and refugees, but we don't often hear about them, and we often have this view of them as being lowly and people who can't adapt into our society. And we're looking at somebody who, you know, came from a very poor country, from terrible circumstances, essentially, you know, get to the top.
Yeah, it's not a lovely story, though. He was trafficked. He was
It was a horrible
sold in
story.
as a child slave.
Yes.
This is not like a nice story of heartwarming story of refugees.
It's not supposed to be a heartwarming story. What it's supposed to be is to show the vulnerability of certain people that are being trafficked into this country and humanizing those people as opposed to demonizing them like they've been.
I think there are a couple of things that are saying. One is that the justification for him not losing his citizenship, which is important to put on the record, I think, is that when he was trafficked, he was 9 years
and
old.
not 10.
And not 10. So he had absolutely no legal or otherwise control over the situation. The other thing that struck me was, and I just looked up the figure, the International Labour Organization, it's very difficult to tell how many people are now enslaved. And you'll remember, it's important to remember that slavery used to be about the ownership of other people. It's now about the control of other people. But some 40 million people across the world are enslaved in one way or another. 15 million of those are in forced marriages. So you've got, you know, what this illustrates, I think you're right, is it illustrates that actually, I mean, I know this from some years ago, but this is not a problem we've begun to solve. There are people in Britain today enslaved, you know, there are nail bars, there are nannies, there are whole places where particularly women and children are being made to work for.
I think it's really important, and I'm trying to remember the name of the book, but, you know, there's many different types of slavery, and they vary in degrees of severity and things like that. So I think when we're using that term, I wish that there would almost be a prefix on that so we could be a little bit more specific about what we're talking about.
Well, there's enforced marriage, there's enforced labour.
There's chattel slavery,
slavery, and then there's people being, there's enforced labour, but then there's people being pushed into labour.
There's wage slavery.
Wage slavery for absolutely no money at all. And then there's kids being made to work and so on and so forth. No, that's exactly right. But I think it's important, too, that we don't, you know, we've got this sort of obsession, quite rightly, with the legacy of slavery. So it's important to understand that. But it's also important to understand that what the abolition of slavery, i.e. the ownership of other human beings, did something which changed the nature of slavery. So when we talk about it now, it is of a different kind than it was then. And we should be careful, and I agree with you.
And I think we should also note that when there's those markets in the demand, that a lot of the time, a lot of this slavery is very much underground.
Yeah. Wednesday's Guardian now, and as Elon Musk's Twitter debacle continues, Simon, you have this...
Well, what's happened is that you may remember, viewers and listeners may remember, that Elon Musk was planning to buy Twitter for $44 billion, which he said he had, and he had finance deal and so on and so forth. And there's been an argument that has gone on for the last few months about whether or not Twitter is revealing the extent of the bot accounts, because he has, I don't quite know why this is so important, but it is very important to him.
Well, it's important because there's advertising revenue to be had, and it would depend on whether real people are seeing the advertising.
You see, thank you very much. Now, that's the reason for it. Now, there are two things that make me laugh about this deal. One is that if he forfeits the deal, there is a fee to pay of $1 billion. Yeah. And he is worth $123 billion. And I just worked out that if you have a house at the moment that your asset value, the asset value of which is $500,000, you know, perhaps an averagey sort of house, that would mean the equivalent of £1,000 for us mere mortals.
Right.
He can afford $1 billion, is my point. But the other thing is, too, that I do think that it would be useful for him to also look at the number of accounts who think that he's perfectly acceptable to characterise people they don't agree with as bigots and fascists and Nazis, and so it goes on. It seems to me, you know, the way in which Twitter is currently operating is absolutely disastrous. So I'm a bit on the side of him opening it up were he to do that, but he's clearly not going to do that because he's not going to buy it.
Well, it seems like there's some discussion, I wouldn't know exactly how it works, but there's some discussion on Twitter itself that Twitter is being lured into a trap here because Musk wants to see complete transparency, disclosure of all the figures that they have, and if he gets sued, then that will force Twitter to reveal all.
Oh, because they'll have to reveal it in court.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I don't know whether
My favourite joke about Twitter.
Can they even determine who's a bot necessarily? I mean, that's the question. I have a little bit more of a cynical look on this story. I think he was just curious about what he could do to the value of the shares, right? And what his potential,
right.
you know, him trying to buy something, what that can do to a share, right? Because let's just say, I'm just going to buy 100,000 shares of YouTube, and then maybe in 2 months, I'm going to buy YouTube, and those shares are going to go up. So I don't know if that would fall under, you know, the umbrella of insider trading. But I also think, you know, this whole excuse about the 5% bots, which I think, like I said before, is unprovable, is a potential caveat for him to get out of this deal just because he was testing the markets in the first place.
It's not insider.
Why would he want to change the value of shares that he doesn't want to buy?
Well, no. I'm saying he wants to see the effect of him buying
but if they went up
on the share or down, right?
Yeah.
It can help him either way, whether or not he's buying them, if it goes up or down. It's very valuable information for him to have when he's making future purchases.
That is all for part 2, folks. Coming up, we have got the Mafia, of course, Mumsnet, even worse, and the Welsh. Goodness, the ultimate trio. See you in 2 minutes.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
And welcome back to Headliners with me, Simon Evans. This is the third part of the show where things get a little bit weird as a rule, and we touch on the wackier stories of the day. Joining me are comedians Dana Alexander and Simon Fanshawe, and our first story sees the mafia diversifying into education, Simon.
This is a story from India. It's from Uttar Pradesh, where 2 journalists discovered that the people who previously had been involved in drugs and human trafficking have now turned their attention to fake exam papers. I mean, it's a bit like going from cocaine to vaping, really, isn't it? But what they've discovered is that they can pay an official anything between £5,000, the equivalent of £5,000 to £20,000. Basically, they get the exam paper early. They've done it in a number of ways. They start centres where they get access to the exam paper. They bribe people in the ministry so they get access to the exam paper. And these have become massive currency because there are huge numbers of kids who are coming out of school who want opportunities and there aren't the jobs. And in January, they had a thing where 10 million applicants applied for 40,000 jobs on the railways, and as a consequence, there were massive riots, and they torched stations and things. So basically, it's a supply and demand thing of which these gangsters are taking advantage.
So you basically get all the questions beforehand. You don't get the answers so much as you just get to see what the questions are.
I think you get both. Right. They're putting in these people called solvers who've done the exam before.
Because this is already, I know this is big business, and you can even download essays and so on in this country, can't you? Quite easily.
Yes, I think you get the exams. I think you get the answers as well here.
Well, I mean, it sounds vaguely comical, because it's not comical at all, is it? People's lives can be ruined every bit as easily by not being able to, compete fairly for an exam grade.
Well, also, too, the people who set the exams, what they have to do is, the minute this happens, they have to abandon all the exams. So you're right. Yeah. So the people who want the opportunities can't get the opportunities anyway now.
I wonder what happens when they abandon the exams, as they have done in this situation, if people are going to ask for their money back, because the amounts that people are actually spending on these exams is quite large when you consider what they make. And the numbers, and I'm also interested in them upgrading the way that they do this. So they're starting to have kids with Bluetooths in their ears while they're just getting better and better and better at the cheating.
Yeah, it's a very fast-moving game, that. Our next story, I personally preferred it when The Who played music rather than getting involved in gender politics, Dana, but they have things to say about how many sexes there are, is it, or the genders?
Yeah, so now, there's a difference between gender and sex. So now sex is not limited to being either male or female. So fury over the WHO, the World Health Organization's woke guidance. So, basically, a lot of people, experts called for a move of the dismissal of that are calling this a dismissal of basic biology. So they're trying
to clarify, this is not the same thing as saying non-binary or I'm
gender is usually a behavioral expression, right? How you wear your hair and your clothes and things like that. And sex is how you determine your actual
gametes, that sort of thing.
But
DNA.
Yes, and I think this is really interesting because we've talked about how you determine whether or not a man or a woman is appropriate for whatever sports category. It used to be chromosomal checks, right? And now we'd have there's 6 common karyotypes, right? So that's X, XX, XXY, XY, XYY, XXXY, right? So these are 6 of the most common gender combinations. So, I mean, if a binary is to suggest that there are only 2, that would eliminate the intersex people, which we know exist, even if they are a small minority.
No. Let's be very clear about this. The chromosomal thing there's huge numbers of variants, but there is no chromosomal test that suggests this other than 2 sexes. There are males and females. And the point about intersex people is they don't want to be thrown under that bus. So you need to stop doing that because they are of a particular sex. The problem is the demonstration of the sex, in other words, their secondary sex characteristics are ambiguous. And their campaign is to say, we do not want to have enforced surgical choices made for us when we are young. We want to grow up and make a decision then based on our biology. Biology has a material basis, in fact, and it has a material basis in health. And
so you're saying every single person has a definitive male or female. What would you say Caster Semenya
There are 2 sexes. Well, of course there are ambiguities.
Well, what's Caster Semenya? You said there are 2 sexes, so which one is she?
What she has got is particular forms of chromosomal abnormalities.
But
yes.
What is she? Is she a man or a woman?
I haven't seen her medical records. The point about it is that basic biology is fundamental. Fundamental to the way in which health presents. So heart attack. If you have a heart attack, you present in a totally different way than if I have a heart attack.
What about somebody who has undescended testicles? But with
there are going to be anomalies. I went out with a friend, a lover, years ago, who had 1.5 legs, and he says to me now, just because I have 1.5 legs doesn't mean to say the human race is not bipedal. The point is, fundamentally, there are 2 sexes. There may well be anomalies, but fundamentally, there are 2 sexes, and they are important. So the World Health Organization...
Can a binary exist with anomalies, though?
Yes, of course they can. And what is the World Health Organization going to do about female genital mutilation? Was it going to suddenly say, let's identify women, the girls out of
Is that excluded by saying, for instance, somebody like Caster Semenya is a 3rd sex? Does that make it problematic to deal with female genital mutilation, or are you mainly battling with cultural problems?
I think one's battling with cultural problems and saying that there's a fundamental issue around where sex matters and where you have anomalies, we have to find sensible ways of dealing with them. The anomalies are a minute part of, and yes, you can have a binary with anomalies.
What do you think, Dana?
Well, I think it's what I'd like to know is how do you determine this? And that's where the controversy is. Is it that I can see the actual genitalia? Is it the chromosomal makeup? Or is it how much testosterone you have, right?
OK. The Telegraph, we are slowing the pace down a little bit now in one of our principalities.
Wales set to lower speed limit to 20 mph nationally across Wales. I mean, could Wales get any slower? He says, channeling Chandler from Friends.
It's nationally within built-up neighbourhoods, not on the main roads.
I have to say, I think the story is ambiguous because as far as I can make out, the ultimate aim is to cut the speed limit to 20% on everything except, motorways and whatever.
20 miles per hour.
20 miles an hour. Yeah. So, that seems to me to be... It's really sensible. If you hit a kid or adult at 30 miles an hour, you're 40% more likely to kill them than if you're at 20 miles an hour. So it's a good idea, but it seems a bit mad to spread it across every road.
We have 20s painted on the roads in Hove. Nobody obeys it.
Well, that's the other question.
Nobody does. Of course, if you put cameras up and start flashing it at 20 miles per hour, I suppose, you might enforce it.
But the point is, it does create safety in residential areas. That is a good thing. But the thing that seems a bit odd is to spread it everywhere. But on the other hand, why do car drivers want to drive so fast? If I had a superpower, it would be to point at people who drive through where I live and point at their car, and their car would instantly levitate, and they would not be allowed down until they agreed to drive slower again.
You don't drive, though, do you, Simon?
Yes, I drive. I just don't have a car.
Ah, OK. But you do drive?
I drive. I love driving. I drive rental cars.
Fair enough. Drive it like it's a rental in your case. Excessive care. Wednesday's Mirror next, and this is one pub fit for a king.
This is an extraordinary story.
Yeah, little island just off the coast of Cumbria, is that right?
Peel Island, spelled P-I-E-L. Peel Island. And what you did, there's a pub on it, and there's an island, and you can apply for this thing, and you have to take care of the island, and you get to become the king of Peel Island. And two things about this. One is there's an ex-king, so I'm not entirely sure what the limit of the reign is.
The king is retired. Long live the king.
Yes, the king is retired. But those of you who have been to India and took exams will remember that Lambert Simnel, who is the 10-year-old pretender to the throne, who they tried to get in and depose Henry VII. The army that supported him came in through Peel Island. But anyway, this guy, who's an electrical engineer and worked on submarines, has given up his job, taken over the island, and he's renovating the pub, and he's now king of whatnot, and he's going to be sat on a log, and he's going to have a beer poured over him. That's the ceremony.
You fancy becoming queen of an island somewhere?
Well, if queen means I have to be a pub landlord, and I have to supply a pub with a place that you might have to walk with a keg of beer over to it.
Now, talking of kegs of beer, this next story does actually interest me. The great hydration myth has been debunked, it seems.
Yes, so we've all been told to drink 6 to 8 glasses of water because it's going to promote all sorts of types of health, from your skin to your, I don't know, whatever they're saying. But what I think is really interesting about this story is that there is no actual scientific evidence that we need to drink that much water. So what I'm really interested in is when this fad became a fad, right? And how closely linked are these these wellness
fads?
These groups and whatever. You know how they
pressure groups, lobby
groups, how closely related they are, what the relationships are with people like Evian and Dasani and things like that. Because I mean, that seems like a little bit of a racket to me. I mean, water costs more than gas.
People were always saying when we went out to play, our mums never went, make sure you're taking your bottle of water with you. I mean,
well, the thing is, we get most of our water from food.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Tortoises do.
And here's another thing I discovered from this story is that Margaret McCartney, who was a Scottish GP writer and broadcaster on health, there is this myth that unless you've got really clear urine, you are somehow dehydrated, which is absolute rubbish. In healthy people, yellow urine is actually a sign that your kidneys are working appropriately. If your urine's very clear, it means you're drinking fluids that your body doesn't need.
Okay.
And the analogy they use is like filling up a gas tank with an overflow of gas and thinking that's going to help the performance of the car, right?
Speaking of poor nutritional choices, seems like there's been hell on earth for a vegan working at Subway for reasons other than you might immediately guess.
I misread this title. It said Subway boss taunted vegan worker by waving meat at her. And I had this impression of, somebody in Tottenham Court Road going, yay, it's fascinating. Turns out it's Subway, the sandwich shop.
Yes.
It's a hideous story. This poor woman worked there. I mean, we can make fun of vegans as much as you like. This poor woman had a boss who literally waved meat in her face. He wouldn't let her use... He provided no sanitary towel facilities and menstruation facilities and so on and so forth. And jolly good, Subway had to pay 13 grand. Absolutely terrible.
You can buy a lot of nuts for that.
Never
now, one last story
pudding.
we have here, and I know you were doing some research on this earlier, Simon, so we'll try and squeeze it in. This is the police dog sniffing out record-breaking drugs haul, Dana.
Ooh, yes. Sorry, we've just skipped a bunch, right?
We have had to get through them.
Scooby-Hoo. Police dogs sniffing out record-breaking drug hauls as 5,000 pounds of meth worth 14 million are seized. And what we were trying to discuss is how they actually came to this number. So he went around the office asking, does anyone know the price of a gram? Does anybody know how many grams are in an ounce? I knew that one.
The gram and an ounce were roughly of the same amount.
Shut up. Don't be unfair to me. It's too late at night. But I did work out in the end that this hall, apparently, they're selling crystal meth at $8 a gram. So my advice, if you're a crystal meth addict, get round to find this dog.
Yeah, is that because it's got like hairs in it? Do you think?
I don't know, but it's. I mean, I looked up in America, the law enforcement agencies say that a crystal meth gram costs between $10 and $60, and she said, "Wow, that's a big price variance."
It is, but I guess it depends on how much you buy at a time, right?
I can't believe they didn't go with the headline "Barking Bad" as well. That would have been
Barking Bad.
Not bad, is it?
Very good.
That was my headline.
That is all we have time for on tonight's show. It's been an absolute pleasure. My guest Simon Fanshawe, Dana Alexander, thank you so much. I have been Simon Evans. I am back here tomorrow night. Having had a week off last week when all the action was happening, I now have to put in a couple of extra shifts this week to make up. So hopefully see you tomorrow night and we'll have more news on everything that matters. Take care. Good night.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's